That's 0.35 millimeters. See how it goes in there? That means that clearance exists. Now, as we tighten things down a little bit, that will probably open up just a little bit. So let's go ahead and tighten it down and lock it in place. Guys, all the cars that you see in these videos are for sale on my website, www.woodsandbarclay.com. Enjoy the video. Okay, to do a valve adjustment, we just need to pop off some of the linkage to get this valve cover off. And we also need to remove this throttle linkage that goes into the firewall. So let's go ahead and take these guys off. We'll just take that arm, put it right there. Put a little piece of painter's tape on it. There we go. This valve cover is now loose. And we can just pick it straight up. Now you get up and disconnect our glow plug cable. There we go. All right, we'll set this aside. We're gonna clean this off in the parts washer before reinstalling it. But let's go ahead and take a look at our valve adjustment. Okay, first thing I want to do, I want to inspect the timing chain. Oh yeah, look how tight that is. I'm looking for any slop or any play in the timing chain. That is super tight. You can see there's our tensioner right there, and the tensioner is pushing the guide rail right up against it. Super tight. There's our chain guide right there. Excellent condition. And I'm looking at the cam lobes. See how clean that cam lobe is? There we go. No scoring. Let me zoom in for you. See how there's no scoring, no marks? That means the oil is always changed regularly and in good condition. See how good those cam lobes look? Excellent condition. It looks extremely nice in here. And then up here, we see this rail that runs down here? That's our oil squirter. And the oil squirter, I don't know if you can see, it has little holes underneath it, and it squirts oil onto each cam lobe. But I'm very, very impressed with how this engine looks underneath here. There's the rocker right there. Very, very nice, very, very clean. Yeah, super healthy condition. These people really took care of this engine. All right, let's go ahead and start our valve adjustment. All right, guys, what we're going to do is start by adjusting this first valve here. Now, let me show you. You have intake and exhaust valves. Let me show you how that works. Okay, Kent Bergsman out of Mercedes Source made a great little diagram. I use this all the time. And you can see on a 5-cylinder diesel, it's exhaust intake, intake exhaust, exhaust intake, intake exhaust, exhaust intake. Your firewall, your core support, this is the vehicle emissions control information. It tells us what the lash is supposed to be. So water temp below 30 degrees Celsius. So that's what we're at right now. This is a cold engine. The intake should be 0.10 millimeters and the exhaust should be 0.35 millimeters. So our first one is an exhaust, and on a cold engine, the exhaust should be 0.35 millimeters. So let's get our cam lobe in the right orientation, and you want your cam lobe, you want to measure at the base between the rocker and the base of the cam. So our cam is pointed this way. So an easy way to make that straight up and down, you can put a wrench on the power steering nut. And if your belts are good condition and tight, see that? You can move the engine. There we go. A little bit more. Now, if that doesn't work, you go down on the front of the crankshaft and you can use a I think it's a 1 1/8. All right, there we go. So we have that cam lobe pointing straight up. Now, our rocker arm is on the base of the cam. So instead of pointing it straight up, I'm going to move it over just a little bit to like the 1 o'clock position. So the base is absolutely on there. So there we go. All right, now you can see how it's angled a little that way. And that guarantees the base of this cam lobe is on that rocker. Now let's get our 0.35 millimeter filler gauge. Let me say that again. Our 0.35 millimeter feeler gauge. And we want to see what our clearance is down here. You can see, there's our, you can see our cam is right there. There's our cam lobe. And we have a, there you go, 0.35 millimeter feeler gauge. Now, all you want to do, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see this, you want to see if that feeler gauge goes in. No, it does not. That means we need to adjust this valve and open up the clearance. Unfortunately, this is pretty difficult to record. I'm on the other side of the engine now. And we want to stick a wrench on the bottom nut. Here, let me show you what I'm doing. Valve, you see I have a top nut, the silver one, and a bottom nut, the metal colored one. I guess that might be aluminum versus steel. So you want to loosen the top nut and then make an adjustment and then lock them back together. One's a lock nut, one's an adjustment nut. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We need to open up the gap. So that means we need to screw the nut down to open the gap between the rocker and the bottom of the cam lobe. We have different angles on our wrenches. I really like Kent's wrenches. All right, there we go. And we're going to counterclockwise and break those loose. There we go. Now I'm going to screw the bottom one down like, there you go, about a half turn, and then follow it with the top one. Okay, I'm not going to tighten it down. Now I just want to check my setting. Here we go. The feeler gauge now goes in here. See that? It's a little snug, but that's 35 thousandths. Just a little resistance. That's how we want it. I'm sorry, not 35 thousandths. That's 0.35 millimeters. See how it goes in there? That means that clearance exists. Now, as we tighten things down a little bit, that will probably open up just a little bit. So let's go ahead and tighten it down and lock it in place. And then tighten it back up there. There we go. That's exactly where I want it. So that valve is done. Now I'm going to pick the next cam lobe that's about to be at the 1 o'clock position. I can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4. That fifth one right there. I don't know if you guys can see that. Yeah, that fifth one is about to be all the way up. So I'm going to go ahead and move to that one. Now the fifth one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's an exhaust. So again, that's 0.35 millimeters. So guys, I'm going to go down the line and get all these adjusted to within spec. And I'm not going to record myself doing the entire engine because that is extremely time consuming. But there's other videos on the YouTube channel that specifically show me doing a very detailed valve adjustment. I think the best one is probably for the 1985 300 CD valve adjustment. Just search for that on YouTube. Anyway, let me finish this out, get a new valve cover gasket on here, put the valve cover, the linkage back on, and we will be done with the valve adjustment. Okay, I just finished the valve adjustment. Every single valve is exactly within spec. As I said before, the specs are listed right on the core support. 30 degrees Celsius or below. Intake is 0.10 millimeters. Exhaust is 0.35 millimeters. And I got checks all down the line. So now that that's done, we have our valve cover. And here is the new valve cover gasket. So we want to take off this gasket. And then I just want to wash this up in the parts washer and put our gasket back on and then install it on the car. peel off our old gasket. And let's go ahead, throw that away. And let's put this in the parts washer. All I want to do is just kind of knock off a little bit of the oil. So then I'll scrub it with some, this is 4/0 steel wool. And you want to check your valves again, probably in 30,000 miles. Mercedes says to do it, I think like every 15,000, but that's totally unnecessary. I've done that before several times, checked at 15,000, and they really only start to move a little from wear at like 30,000. And then even at 30,000, you might just need to make an adjustment to one valve. Once they're set, they're pretty good for a long time. All right, we got that on there. Let's go ahead and get this back on the car. All right, now, when you set it back down there, you want to check around the edges and make sure your gasket didn't come loose or fold anywhere, and especially around the back, because that's where it tends to happen. All right, we're good. Yep, we're good back there too, so that's on. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put our linkage back together, and then we'll reattach the valve cover. We'll finish the torque by hand. All right, there we go, guys. Valve adjustment done. So let's go ahead and fire this up, see how she runs with a fresh valve adjustment. Guys, did you see how quick that fired up? And see how smooth the engine is running now? Look at that. Literally no vibration. See how smooth it is and how fast it fired up? That's a good valve adjustment. Wow, awesome. All right, guys, today I'm flushing all the brake fluid out of the system, and I'm also bleeding the brakes. So I've already flushed it all through once, refilled the master cylinder, and you don't want to get it too low. You want to make sure you keep it topped up because I wanted to get all the fluid out of there that was already in the system and be able to replace it with all fresh fluid. So this is the second time we're bleeding, and I just have a hose and a cup, and I have a string on it too, so I can hang it if I need to. So we're going to go ahead and crack this loose. And there we go. Can you see our fluid coming out of there? See our fresh fluid? And I like to hold it up in the air because the bubbles will all go to the top. And basically it's gravity bleeding. So the weight from the master cylinder, there you go. Can you guys see it? It's creeping up right there. And the weight from the master cylinder is higher than the back wheel here. So you can see it's creeping up the line there, all the way up. So just the weight of the fluid will press it down through the system and all the bubbles come out of the top. There we go. And I like to hold my hose a little higher so it bleeds basically uphill and gets any bubbles out of there. So we'll go ahead and crack this loose. There we go. There we go. See a couple of bubbles just came out of there? I don't know if you guys can see that, but I see one little bubble there. Just want to make sure there's no bubbles in the system. So we'll bleed that out. And we'll let a little bit run out, and then we'll move up to the fronts. And you'll notice, guys, I bled from the rear passenger to the rear driver to the front passenger to the front driver. So you start with the caliper that's farthest away from the master cylinder, and then you slowly get closer and closer to the master cylinder. That way that's just the order of operation for how you bleed brakes by gravity. All right. Okay, see the bubbles coming out of that one? Good, we got some good bubbles out of there. And this is just bleeding up. There we go. You see it going all the way up the tube. I don't know if you guys could see that, but we got a good bit of bubbles that just came out of this one. And you notice the bleeders are at the top of the caliper. You don't see bleeders at the bottom of the caliper because air rises. So you want the bleeders always at the top. Now, in some race cars, you'll see them at the bottom. On like 6-piston, you'll see them left, right. You'll see 4 bleeders to bleed like each little section, but not on passenger cars. Well, usually not on passenger cars. The bleeder is always at the top, so any air rises will come out of the bleeder first when you bleed the system. All right, that one's good. And we will crack this one loose and see if any air comes out. There we go. Got some bubbles. Good. And now they're gone. So there's just barely any bubbles in there. So we'll go ahead and let this bleed for a second. There you go. Hear it dripping out of there. We're just running. Now these all have fresh fluid in all the calipers and all the brake lines and the master cylinder and the reservoir. Okay, guys, you can see, basically, you see how the brake fluid is basically at the same color as the container. That is all fresh brake fluid. And you can see the min line right there, and there's a max line right there. I like to go ahead and fill it up like about halfway right there. Sometimes a little bit more, but this is all serviced and fresh now. The next thing I want to do is change the oil. We need to top off our power steering fluid because if you remember, we reattached our hoses after having them cadmium plated. So I want to make sure we have no air bubbles in the power steering fluid. So to do that, while the car is on the lift, I'm going to go ahead, turn the wheels back and forth several times. That'll purge any air bubbles out of the system, and then we'll top it off. Also, I want to check the transmission fluid. Due to the number of service records on this vehicle, oh yeah, that's brand new. Let me get a rag to show you guys that. So if there's like a hint of any brown in the transmission fluid, that means it needs to be changed. But what you look for is nice bright red fluid, and we can see in this case that is bright red. So the transmission has been recently serviced for sure. Do not need to change that transmission fluid. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on the oil change. Top off this power steering fluid because we've already changed it and flushed it when we disconnected the power steering lines. It all drained out. And then we want to start on a valve adjustment. There we go. I'm curious to see if you guys see any bubbles come up when I start turning the wheel from lock to lock. So let me go do that now. Okay, I just turned that wheel lock to lock like 10 times, and you should have seen, yep, see the bubbles that came out? So we want to keep doing that. Make sure we get any kind of bubbles out of the system before we top it off. Okay, all the air bubbles are out of the system, and we really don't need to top it up much. There's the marker right there. We just need a little. Guys, that is it. It was basically already full from when I filled it up after replacing the line. So see, no bubbles now. We got all those out of the system. And you want to make sure you have your little gasket around your cap. See that little gasket that goes around there? And make sure that it seals. Because you saw how high that fluid came up when we were getting the air out of there. I love the 116s. They have this nice cadmium plated metal housing. I really like that. And guys, you already saw a fresh power steering fluid filter go in the video where I was doing the throttle linkage reinstall and power steering line reinstall. All right, let's go ahead, get a fresh oil filter and change the oil on this guy. I could go through the service records and see if it was recently done. But guys, changing the oil is something I do on every single vehicle. Now, transmission fluid is different. If that is bright red and very clean, you know that it's been serviced and you don't need to waste your time. But oil on these diesels, you know, it's just always black. So I always just like to make sure and change it no matter what. So that is very good. All right, and there we go. Guys, those seals I was talking about are right here. Those plug a hole at the very bottom of the oil filter housing, so the oil doesn't drain back into the sump. It keeps it in the oil filter housing, so that increases your oil pressure quicker when you initially start the vehicle. So those little rubber O-rings are good on here and don't need to be changed. If I open up the oil filter housing and there's no oil in it, then that means these haven't been changed and you need to do that. In this case, they've already been changed, which is a bonus. Means people were really taking care of this car. Okay, we just removed the old O-ring. It's important you take the sealing O-ring off the oil filter cap. And a new one is included with your filter. So we'll get this guy on here. All right, guys, I always use Rotella T4 15W40 heavy-duty diesel engine oil. Nothing fancy, nothing synthetic. This is just old-school dinosaur diesel oil. Okay, our mileage is 77, 300, 78, 79, 80. So we'll say the next change should be 80. 300. That's 3,000 miles. There we go. Okay, the final service we need to do on this vehicle is the rear differential oil. So let's go ahead and get it up on the lift, change out that oil. All right, guys, first thing you always want to check when you're refilling your diff, first you want to look for any leaks. And this vehicle does not have any leaks around the diff, so I'm guessing this was resealed at some point because it's super dry under here. But first thing you want to do is make sure you can get your fill plug open. So let me go ahead and get my hammer and we'll make sure we can get our fill plug open. All right, there we go. All right, good. We got our fill plug open. So we'll go ahead and take that out. And then we'll get our drain plug up. Oh, yeah, that is full. Oh, wow. That is fresh fluid, you guys. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that was full to the top and that fluid is fresh. So someone has already serviced this, I am pretty sure. You know what? we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. It looks like it's fresh fluid to me. It's much easier to tell on transmissions, but diffs, sometimes you can tell when it's fresh. I'm going to go ahead and change it though. Okay, no, there's some miles on this. It's been, but it does look really, really good. I'm guessing this was probably changed 20,000-30,000 miles ago. We're going to go ahead and put some fresh in there. All right, stuff you want to use here: 80 W90 good old gear oil. Nothing fancy. And you just want to fill it until it comes out of the fill hole. And the last thing we want to do after this, guys, is check our fuel sending unit to make sure it is clean. We'll remove that from the rear package tray inside the vehicle. It's under the first aid kit. We'll disassemble that and make sure there's no... Sometimes they get gummed up and your fuel gauge won't work correctly. All right. That is full. So let's stick our plug back in there. And there we go. All right, guys, that's good for another 50, 60, 70,000 miles. You don't have to change these as often, but I always like to change it on vehicles when I don't know. All right, there we go. All right, guys, to get access to the fuel sender, we want to lift up the first aid kit, and we want to pull this guy out. We'll just set this in the floorboard. And I know you probably can't see this in the video, but there's 4 screws right here. There. We're going to take those out and then slide this black tray out, and we'll get access to our fuel sender. All right, guys, I've pulled out the tray, and we can see underneath here, there is our fuel sender. So we just want to unplug it. Sorry, my light went dead. We'll unplug it, and then we need to screw this out. And we have a special socket that goes around it like that. So we'll go ahead and screw this out and remove it. And guys, when you're pulling it out, when you're pulling it out, hold your hand on it, slide it up, and immediately grip at the bottom, and it won't drip all over the back of your car. Otherwise, it'll drip because that is the drain tube. So we're going to go ahead and take this apart. We'll inspect the internals because inside here is a bobber. Now I can hear this one is moving freely, so I think someone has already cleaned this, but we're going to inspect it just to make sure. Okay, I've modified a little set of needle nose pliers because there's a strange nut on the end here that you have to get into the channel to get it to. All right, we'll set that down there, remove our base plate, and we'll check the condition. Okay, we've got a little gunk in there. There we go. That's the stuff right there, guys. That is just gunk from old diesel. And you want to wash that out of here. It hasn't stopped the bobber from working yet, but see that bobber slides. There we go. And if you let that gunk build up, it'll block it from sliding, and it won't tell won't tell the correct fuel level anymore. So let's go ahead and wash this off in the parts washer. There you go. See how it's perfectly clean down in there now? No gunk at all. And now you want to be very careful with this. There's 3 copper wire and like 2 aluminum wires. You do not want to break those. So very carefully, you want to clean the bobber. All right, guys, I'm happy with that. See how good that works? Let's go ahead and get this back in the car. Okay, see there's a little notch right here, and in the cap there's also a little notch. You want to line those up when you're reassembling. There you go. Now we will put our cap on the end. Then we will put our base plate and our little nut. Before I tighten that down, listen. Hear it? Hear how clean that is now? That'll be good for the next, 20 years. All right, there we go. And that is complete, guys. Cleaned and serviced fuel sending unit, good for the next 20 years or more. All right, guys, that's it for this beautiful 300 SD. That's the end of the general service and maintenance video. Next, I'm going to go get the rear seat from Jose, who's fixed the horsehair padding. And then we're off to the alignment shop. And then we got a test drive and walk around video. See you next time.